Hey, in this video we're going to talk about solving linear equations with fractions. So before we start this lesson, just make sure you're comfortable with solving basic linear equations if they don't have fractions, and then just working with fractions in general, multiplying fractions, adding, subtracting fractions, all that. All right, and basically just put those two things together and you'll get this lesson. All right, so first let's quickly review our steps for solving a linear equation. Our first step is we want to simplify both sides if we can. All right, then we move terms to the side. So x terms go on one side, non-x terms go on the other. And the last thing is we divide to get that x isolated completely by itself. All right, so here's an example. If we solve it like that series of steps, not really any simplifying I can do in terms of combining like terms or anything like that. So now I go to moving terms. The first thing I do is add 3/4 to both sides because I want to get that term to the other side of the equation. All right, but I already run into a problem. I have to add 1/8 plus 3/4. So I'm going to go to the side, 1/8 plus 3/4. I had to get a common denominator, so I need to multiply 3/4 by 2 on the top and bottom because I'm going to turn that 4 into an 8. So it's going to turn into 6/8, and that's 7/8. All right, so that's going to be the right-hand side. And now I want to get rid of this 1/2. All right. How do you get rid of a 1/2? There's a bunch of different ways you could divide by 1/2. The more straightforward way, I think, is you multiply it by 2/1. That's going to multiply both sides by 2/1. And that's going to give me the x by itself now. On the right-hand side, 7 times 2 is 14/8. And that fraction simplifies. 14 and 8 are both divisible by 2. So I can simplify that to 7/4. All right, so my final answer is 7/4. All right, so if you're comfortable doing it this way, you really don't have to watch the rest of the video. You can just work with your fractions all the time. All right, but there is a way we can make it a little bit simpler on ourselves and not have to worry about doing kind of this stuff at the side and things like that. All right, so instead of working with fractions for the entirety of your problem, we can just make our first step, our simplifying step, to just get rid of the fractions. And it'll just make our life a little bit simpler. It'll just turn into a problem where there's no fractions, and we can move things around and manipulate them a bit easier. All right, in order to get rid of a fraction, say we had like 3/7. If I were to multiply 3/7 by 7/1, or just 7, I just wrote it as 7/1, the 7s would cancel, and I would just get the whole number 3. So by multiplying a fraction by its denominator, the fraction goes away, and it just turns into a whole number. All right, so that's our strategy. We're going to multiply fractions by their denominators. All right, the only extra thing we have to keep in mind is working with an equation. And whenever you're working with an equation, you have to keep it balanced. So you have to make sure that I multiply everything by that number. All right, so let's look at the example we just did again. 1/2 x minus 3/4 equals 1/8. All right, in general, when you're doing this strategy, I would always start with the biggest number first because there's a chance it'll simplify the smaller numbers. So if I start with the biggest denominator, the biggest denominator is 8. All right, so that's what I'm going to do first. I'm going to multiply everything by 8. So the right-hand side, I'm going to multiply by 8 because that's the denominator there. And that means I have to multiply the left-hand side by 8 as well. So the right-hand side's the most straightforward one, 1/8 times 8. The reason I'm multiplying by 8 is because they're just going to cancel, and I just get that number on the top, 1. On the left-hand side, the thing I'm multiplying by isn't exactly the denominator. So what I'll do is just change it into a fraction. You can always make a whole number a fraction by putting it over 1. And that's going to give me 8/2x. And then 8 times 3 is 24/4. And remember, I'm distributing this. I have to multiply by all the things in that left-hand side. And this will simplify nicely. 8 divided by 2 is just a number. It's just 4x. 24 divided by 4 is also just a number. That's 6. All right, so by starting with the biggest number, I was able to get rid of all 3 fractions at once. If you start with 2, you would get rid of that fraction, but you have to do it again and again. In this case, by starting with the biggest number 8, I quickly, in kind of one step, maybe 2 steps, I transformed it into this linear equation that does not have any more fractions. And now it's much more straightforward to solve. I can add 6 to both sides. And I can divide by 4 to get that x all isolated. X equals 7/4. All right, so this way by using the fact that I can get rid of fractions makes the solving process simpler, but it makes that first step of simplifying your equation it's more steps, but it might make it simpler in terms of solving because you don't have to work with fractions anymore. All right, so here's an example. 2/7 times 3x plus 5 equals 2/3. So there's a couple different ways you could solve this one. If you want to solve it just like the general way, you would distribute this 2/7 in and then start moving things around. But our goal is to get rid of fractions as soon as possible. So I'm going to start with the biggest denominator we have, which in this case is that 7. So I'm going to multiply everything by 7. So I'm going to multiply the left-hand side of the equation by 7. And I'll multiply the right-hand of the equation by 7. The left hand is going to be pretty straightforward because when I multiply this by 7, these 7s just cancel. These ones here just cancel, and I get 2 times 3x plus 5. On the right-hand side, they don't just cancel, so I had to multiply 7/1 becomes 14/3. And I'm only multiplying the top because it's 7/1, not 7/7. This problem still has a fraction, so I can do the same thing again, multiply everything by 3 in this case, because that's the biggest denominator I have left. That's going to give me 3 times 2 is 6 times 3x plus 5. And here, the right-hand side, again, that's the easier one because the 3 and 3 are just going to cancel and give me that numerator 14. Now the fractions are gone, and now this just looks like any problem we would have solved as a general linear equation. So I simplify first, distribute that 6n. That's going to be 3 times 6 is 18. 6 times 5 is 30. Then I get the non-x term to the other side, so I'm going to subtract 30 from both sides. 14 minus 30 is negative 16. And then I divide by 18, because that's going to give me my x all by itself is negative 16 over 18. Both those numbers are divisible by 2, so I can write that as negative 8/9. Again, when you're solving equations and you're doing algebra, there's pretty much an infinite number of ways you could do it. Right? But for me, getting rid of the fractions as a simplifying step makes the actual solving process much simpler because I don't have to go to the side and worry about getting common denominators and all that. The fractions are just gone. All right, so here's a problem for you to try on your own. Again, solve it however you want, all right, but try to practice getting rid of fractions first and then solving the equation. All right, so I'll show you the solution for this problem in 3, 2, 1. And here's the solution I came up with. I got 7/8. So the way I got there is I multiplied, again, by the biggest denominator I have. The biggest denominator I have is 6, so I multiplied everything by 6. And I actually got rid of both the fractions on the left, but didn't completely get rid of that fraction on the right. I did simplify it. All right, so to get rid of that last fraction, now I have to multiply everything by 2. And again, multiply everything by 2. That's why that's 8x plus 2. And then ice out that x, subtracting 2, dividing by 8 to get my final answer down there. All right, so now you can go ahead and practice solving linear equations with fractions. Again, do what makes you comfortable. If you like just keeping the fractions the whole time, you're perfectly capable of doing that. I just prefer the method of getting rid of fractions. That way I'm working with whole numbers when I'm actually doing the solving process. And having that kind of skill of getting rid of fractions is something that will be useful at other times as well. All right, so go ahead and practice this and then take the skill check when you are ready.